Issue for the Minister of Health in relation to the drug Zolgemsna. Number 3, Deputies Darren O'Rourke, Johnny Girk and Peadar Tobin to urgently discuss the threat to emergency and critical care services at Our Lady's Hospital, Navan. And number 4, Deputy Sean Sherlock to discuss the need to fund the N73 upgrade between Mallow and Mitchelstown on road safety grounds. I move now to private members' business. The motion re hospital waiting lists. I ask Deputy David Cullinane to move.
I move.
And you have 20 minutes, Deputy Cullinane.
I'm taking 5 minutes myself, and a number of my colleagues will be taking the remainder of my time. We just heard a very lengthy debate on housing, Minister, where we talked about public land being used for public housing, and also having a strategy that is not built around developers and landlords and institutional investors. And truth be known, the same argument should be made and can be made on healthcare, that public monies should be spent on public healthcare services, and private medicine should not come before the public good. And yet that is not happening, because we have a deeply two-tier health service where private medicine and the private sector is embedded in the healthcare system. Minister, we first of all have to appreciate the scale of the problem that faces us, and we do that in our motion which I'm proposing here today. And the figures are so stark that it's hard for people even to comprehend them. Over 900,000 people on some form of health waiting list, either waiting to see a consultant or waiting for a hospital procedure. The big jump in those figures came before COVID, as we know, but has accelerated due to COVID as well. Of the over 900,000 people who are waiting for treatment, 210,000 are waiting more than 18 months, and 31,000 of those are children. And there is a human story behind each and every one of those people who are waiting for treatment, Minister. I conducted a survey a number of weeks ago, which I published, where I asked those who are waiting on waiting lists, sometimes for years, what their experience is. And I heard so many stories from parents of children with scoliosis, waiting years for treatment, often in pain. I heard stories of people who are waiting for years for orthopaedic treatment, for other procedures, ENT, ophthalmology, areas where we know wait times are very high, and the human consequences of people waiting that long. It has an impact on their mental health, it has an impact on their overall physical well-being, and it has an impact on their ability to work. Many of them are out of work for too long. So my point to you, Minister, is that there are human consequences and real consequences for people when we have the type of waiting lists that we have. I want to go through your amendment to the Sinn Féin motion, Minister, because I have to say it's weak, to say the least, and it's lame in terms of the excuses that you give. And I just want to give some examples, because you talk up some of what was done last year, and I accept that there was investments made in healthcare last year. But you talk about 795 beds that weren't put into the system this year, acute beds, and a target of 938 that would be reached. What you funded last year was 1,150 beds. So 204 of those beds will not be delivered. When you look at the intensive care beds, the ICU beds, we had 600 ICU beds in 2009. Even if you deliver what you have said you will deliver, we'll fall way behind on where we were then. If you look at the mention that you have of community intervention teams, what you forget to say in your amendment is that of the 150 million that you provided for enhanced community services last year, only about half of that money is anticipated to have been spent. You took to your feet as Health Minister last year and you said we're going to recruit 14,500 people into our Irish healthcare system. That's now been revised down to about 7,500. You've only recruited about half of the staff that you said you would. And you can't hide behind COVID, or anything else for that matter, because you were the one that made that promise. COVID was with us when you put those figures out there, when you provided the funding, and when you made those commitments, and you simply haven't delivered. And in the remainder of my time, I have to say to you, Minister, that there are huge challenges in healthcare, and there are big decisions that we have to make. We've had high-profile resignations in Sláinte Care, which I reference in my motion as well. That cannot be seen as a vote of confidence in your government's ability to deliver the big changes. And can I say to you that one of the areas where we collectively have to stand our ground is public consultant contracts. Consultants who work in the public system have to do public work. The other big changes of removing private medicine from public healthcare, moving to universal GP also have to happen. But they're happening at a snail's pace. They're not happening anywhere near quick enough. And if we don't make those big changes, more and more people are going to become disillusioned and more people are going to be waiting on lists. And can I say to you, in terms of your promise to have multi-annual waiting list targets and a plan as well to make that happen, unless you have a centralised referral system, it's not going to work. Unless you have an integrated waiting list management system, it's not going to work. Unless you put the capacity in, it's not going to work. I could wallpaper this room, as you could, with all of the waiting list management plans that we've seen from successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments that haven't worked because you haven't backed it up with capacity. So when I finish, I just want to say this. Think about the people who are the victims of high waiting lists. Those children and adults who are waiting years for treatment. They're the people that we have to deliver for, and they're the people who are at front and centre in terms of why we move this motion here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Last Friday, Minister, I met a woman in Mid-Kerry in the front room of her house. Beautiful view looking out on Castlemaine Harbour. She has been battling and beating cancer for the last 10 years. She's a young family, one of whom returned home from school as we spoke. She receives treatment every 3 weeks in University Hospital Kerry for 3 hours with 6 or 7 others. She knows all the staff by their first name. She had the height of praise for everybody in that unit, and people of Kerry are very proud of all the nurses who work there. She's comforted by the backup services in the University Hospital, the physiotherapy, scans, etc. It did seem strange to me until recently that this unit has been borrowing wards from other departments. The most vulnerable of people, but what is facing her with that amazing view is anxiety and her concerns, because it seems that rather than invest in space to treat these people, the treatment is going to be outsourced to a private hospital. At what financial cost, I don't know, but there will be no ancillary services in that hospital. Nurses say that there will be a risk to health and safety, and if someone becomes unwell, they will have to be blue lighted from one end of the town to the other. Is the government waiting for a charity to pick up the pieces for that unit? Recently, in the last couple of days, there's more depressing news from University Hospital Kerry. Surgeons there sent a letter to GPs that facilities are not there anymore. Elective surgeries are curtailed for 4 weeks running now. Things are falling apart. We in the office are receiving call after call with people waiting an hour for ambulances. The situation isn't sustainable. Nurses who have given a heart and soul to the hospital are leaving, and surgeons have written to GPs saying 2,200 patients are waiting to be seen in surgical outpatients. They say protected surgical daybeds have been taken over by emergency. Nursing and infrastructure shortages mean that the service the people of Kerry deserve cannot be any longer provided. They can no longer accept non-urgent surgical referrals, and I'm asking the government to do something about that.
I'm not being dramatic when I say that people are literally dying on hospital waiting lists. That's a fact. They are, and they're going blind, and their illnesses are getting much, much worse as they wait and wait and wait again to be seen by a consultant in the first instance, and then they wait and wait again for the procedure. For many in need, for instance, of a hip replacement, a single hip replacement, the wait is so long that their good hip becomes banjaxed. So instead of one hip needing replacing, both needs to be done. Can you imagine your hip being so bad that it takes you 20 minutes to get up the stairs to bed or to the toilet? Or what of the fact that the strain from those stair climbs, crawls, the constant excruciating pain, the lack of mobility and the constant use of strong painkillers results often in other ailments, heart attacks, ulcers, obesity and mental health strains. And I know many constituency who have suffered this, including one recently who's a cancer survivor. Others face blindness while languishing on the waiting list to see eye specialists. That is before they are even put on the 4 year-long cataract waiting list. These incidents are scandalous enough, but for children on the waiting list, it's a living disgrace. Shame on the HSE for overseeing, or maybe not overseeing, a waiting list of nearly 100,000 children awaiting operations and medical procedures, and that 100,000 doesn't include children awaiting assessments, speech and language therapy, and much, much more. Ná den éireachta ara, an million a chur COVID nó únsaithe cuas riomhreachta an HSE, níl daoine teomh, tuigeann siad gur seo de thora agus tora polasathe rialtas Fianna Fáil agus Fine Gael ó tháinig siad a gcuacht nuair a cruthaíodh an stáit seo. A ara, smaoinigh ar na hothair, na leanaí, na seandaoine atá na listí feitheamh, agus den beartar air an bríthir atá i rúin Sinn Féin an seo. Bála má bhríochas seo sa críochnú dul siúd tá sa chóras sláinte atá ag denmh trein éireacht. Níl an mil an ortha, níl an lucht ortha, ach an lucht ar an rialtas agus ní déach an rialtas seo, rialtas in ag rialtas. Go magad.
Hachta McLaughlin.
Gor magad. Minister, I've raised this with you before in this chamber, and it's the issue of the funding discrimination that our major hospital in Donegal, Letterkenny University Hospital, continues to endure. There are over 20,000 people in a county of 160,000 on the waiting list. That's 1 in 8. I'm not even including Sligo Hospital, where obviously people in South Donegal will be on the waiting list there. That's a damning indictment of government after government. But the issue for us in Letterkenny University Hospital is that despite the fact that we have the 6th largest hospital in the state, with over 24,000 inpatients before this pandemic, we come 13th when it comes to the budget. Now, you can make some allowance that the major hospitals in Dublin and in Galway are dealing with additional specialities. But how can you explain a situation where you have budgets in the major hospitals 2 to 3 times per head of capita than that in Letterkenny University Hospital? Now, I was asked to get these figures by senior hospital staff in Letterkenny because they felt the only way to get to the bottom of this is through parliamentary questions. So I'm saying to you that this is a scandal, that there has to be an acceptance in the HSE that we are treated like a backwater, that means real impacts in Donegal where people are forced to travel huge distances for basic procedures. Unnecessarily. We should have those specialities in Letterkenny University Hospital, the 6th largest hospital in the state. People should not have to travel long distances. This is about equality of access to healthcare, Minister. I'm asking you to look at this, and I'm going to send you directly all of the statistics that I've gathered up on this.
I'd like to thank my colleague David CULLINANE for putting forward this very important motion to tackle the hospital waiting list. It's absolutely shameful that there's almost 900,000 citizens of this state are languishing on waiting lists just to get the treatment that they need at this very moment in time. And as you know, and I'm good to see the Minister for State here as well for mental health. I'm our spokesperson for mental health, and we all know that early intervention is key in a child's development. The latest figures that I have on waiting lists is there's still over 2,500 children waiting for appointments with camps. 2,500 children waiting for appointments with camps. There's almost 9,000 children waiting for primary care psychology appointments, which is not good enough. And as part of our, in relation to getting testimonies for this motion, we asked people to contact us and give their real life experiences. And some people can't even get on waiting lists. One response we got was, my daughter was referred to the local psychologist services only to get a letter back stating that there was no service in her area. This is not good enough. We've also had announcements from the government in relation to additional funding for mental health. Back in February, the Taoiseach announced a much fanfare of a 10 million additional funding for a COVID response to mental health. Not a penny of that has been spent yet. We're in a mental health emergency and not one single euro has been spent out of that. I got a response to a parliamentary question this week as well in relation to the money that was allocated for shared and division and for the early recommendations in shared and division. There was €23 million allocated in the budget for 2021 for this. To date, there's been 2.7 million spent. That's less than 10% of the money allocated. Now, we need to make sure that this money is not rewashed, redressed, put a new shirt and tie on, and then put back into the budget coming forward. We need to make sure that this money is there and it's ring-fenced for the people that really, really mean it. We were in a mental health emergency, a mental health crisis pre-COVID. We are now in a mental health emergency, and unless this government gets their finger out and starts putting things into action, and if they're announcing money for mental health supports and mental health services, we need to make sure that that resources go to the services that really, really need them, so we can provide these services.
Deputy Quinlivan.
Minister, my city, as you well know, has a number of hospitals and have really fantastic staff working there. The waiting list is not of their making. It's not their fault, but it's them and the patients who suffer. Minister, I believe you have no plan for this. You have no direction. Minister, I raised this issue with you in the chamber since you were appointed, particularly about the trolley crisis in University Hospital Limerick, which is ongoing. This year we'll see almost 1,000 people, or this month, I mean, we'll see almost 1,000 people on trolleys in University Hospital Limerick. Minister, I plead with you again to personally come down and have a look at that. There are over 900,000 people, that has been said, on waiting lists across the state. The figure for University Hospital Limerick are particularly stark. At UHL, there are currently 43,656 people on outpatient waiting lists for consultation. Over 23,000 of them have been waiting for more than a year, and of these, 19,000 have been waiting for more than 18 months. This is totally unacceptable. We can get lost in the figures, but each and every one of these are people with lives that are being impacted by their ailment. Last week, I received a response back from a parliamentary question that I raised regarding to one such individual. A woman in her mid-60s, she's suffering from severe cartilage damage to her knee. It inhibits her movement and restricts her lifestyle. Her status or grading on the waiting list is urgent. Now, for me, the word urgent means that she needs her consultation promptly, yet we're advised that she'll be waiting 30 months. Minister, how can you stand over somebody waiting 30 months for an appointment that is supposed to be urgent, as deemed as urgent? 30 months of pain and limited movement. She will be 70 by the time she sees her consultant. This is an absolute disgrace. Minister, recently a consultant who was on duty at UHL rang me himself to know could I intervene with a patient he had and get a scan for that patient. How bonkers is that a consultant in the hospital rings a local parliamentarian to get a scan done in the hospital? Minister, there's something seriously wrong there, and you need to particularly intervene. We need to centralise referral system coupled with an integrated waiting system to manage the system. The plan in additions will allow for patients to be seen at different hospitals as capacity allows. As I said, UHL consistently has problems of overcrowding. This month today, as I said, we have almost 1,000 people treated on trolleys in the hospital. So, Minister, I refer back to the waiting list and the categories of appointments that people are waiting on. There are so many, and of course the type of appointments that somebody waiting for will be most important for that individual. But one figure that stood out for me, waiting on the maxillofacial outpatient appointments in UHL, these are people who are physically injured to their face, and there are 2,891 people waiting such appointments for 18 months or more. So, Minister, in conclusion, I don't want to be all negative. As WYNNE Sinn Féin, we do have a plan how to fix the health service. We know the direction to take. It will require significant but necessary investment. We cannot have our sick being treated like this, and we cannot leave our health professionals working in such challenging conditions.
Deputy Kenny.
Minister, the issue here is really about capacity more than anything else, and that's the same in every hospital across the state. I'm very conscious, particularly in the University Hospital Sligo, where we have a situation where people are at the moment tonight in waiting on wards where they can't get in. They're been sent up to the wards. There's a 4-bed ward with 6 beds in it. They just don't have the capacity, they don't have the staff. It's the same thing in the emergency department, overrun, hasn't got the staff. And this issue needs to be dealt with. At the moment in the Sale to Hospital group, there are 54 consultant posts vacant. And that's the same, I'm sure, in every other region around the country. And this is the core of the problem, is that the investment isn't been put in for to employ the necessary staff for to deal with this issue. And our hospitals are all running at 100 and over 100% capacity most of the time. Internationally, it's said that there should be around 70% capacity to deal with a surge when it comes. The problem we've got here is that the private system is being used to back up a public system which is in decline. And Minister, you need to get a grip of this, and you need to put that public system back on the agenda as being the priority. And that's clearly what needs to happen. There needs to be a centralised system for waiting lists to ensure that people can get seen as quickly as possible in whatever hospital there's an available appointment. We have got solutions, and we need to have those solutions delivered, Minister. But as long as the government continues to go down the track of using the private system to back up the public system, it's not going to work. And there needs to be a clear division. as to where we're going to go and get on the right track. That we've seen the resignations, and those resignations, I think, are a reflection in the people who are on those boards of frustration that they have, that they want to deliver Sláinte Care. They see the potential of it, and yet they see it being held up, Minister, I have to say, by yourself and by others in the department, who simply have not got it in them to stand up to the vested interests and to ensure that we deliver for our people, and that's what this is about. We have to deliver for the ordinary people out there who are on these waiting lists in pain, in distress, not for months but for years in many cases. And I know many, many people in my constituency that are under that situation, and it simply is not right. And there's right and left in everything. You know, we talk about politics, but there's also right and wrong. And this is a situation of right and wrong. And until you, Minister, and this government is prepared to stand up for the people and to ensure that we deliver, this health service is going down the tubes.
Pat Buckley.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Minister, for your opening remarks. And it's good to see the both ministers here this evening. I'm just going to start very basic with this. Is, you know, the real stories of people, and I listed it from some statements that I've received over the last number of weeks through a recent survey. I'm a full-time carer, a single mother for 2 boys with special needs. I'm waiting 5 years to see a consultant. I don't get respite or home help. Second mother, her teeth are severely out of shape. She's 13, and now is the optimal time to fix them, but the HSE waiting list is at least 4 years. Her confidence is affected hugely. I waited 4.5 years to see a consultant for carpal tunnel. Got to see him in May, was told I needed surgery urgently, was told I would have the surgery by the end of June. I'm still waiting. It's now the end of August. Sláinte Care called for maximum wait times of 12 weeks for inpatient procedures, and in Cork we have at the moment 645 adult patients that are waiting for over 18 months. The total number of patients, adults and children on a waiting list in Cork as an inpatient or daycare stands at 4,846. Sláinte Care also called for maximum time for outpatient waiting times of 10 weeks. We have a total of, between adults and children, on a waiting list in Cork of 66,299. Behind every one of those is a person who's feeling the real impact of the HSE failures. The health service is crumbling. In a recent survey, over 70% of people reported physical health and mental health, including a rise in stress and anxiety, had gotten worse. I'm glad I have the 2 ministers here. We also have the mental health centre, the Ona Curra Centre in Middleton, that the HSE want to close in the middle of a pandemic when we're talking about mental health. So I'm hoping that she will come back to me for that request on a meeting to discuss that. But what I would say, families need help now. We need to create an Irish National Health Service with a deliverable plan to tackle these long waiting lists. We have a national emergency, and the government should recognise this. Thank
you. Deputy Imelda Munster.
Thank you. Minister, I'm just curious in relation to the case you cited about Sarah from Wicklow, and it kind of relays part of the frustration, whether it's HSE management of funding, etc. And you said that the funding for to purchase the joints that Sarah needed was gone, but you were paying overheads and staff and theatres were closed. Was that changed there and then? It was. Well, that's a start, because part of that is the most frustrating thing of all. But just in relation to, we talk about 900,000 people, and I've heard everybody reference that. But just when you stop and think, because we all know those people, 900,000 people in pain, stress, worry, waiting for their scan in a small state like this. And of those 900,000, 100,000 of those are children, and many of them, almost a third, waiting over 18 months. And we can't blame COVID, we can't blame the pandemic, we can't blame the cyber attack. It was 870,000 in January of 2020. I know that's nothing to do with yourself, Minister, but it's a damning indictment of the last government and this government. Now, 2 weeks ago at the Public Accounts Committee, I was told by the HSE that representatives, that I asked about the additional home help hours, and there was 5 million additional to be delivered this year. They'd only delivered 2 million thus far, and they were hoping 1.5 million by the end of the year. but who knows, we're now at the end of September. So they were short 1.5 million. Of the 612 public beds that were to be developed in the winter plan for last year, only 288, Minister, were delivered. And it seems that you're failing to address waiting lists in every single sector of the health service, whether it's for scans, outpatients, inpatients, the whole shooting gallery. People have been waiting so long to be seen. I want to just make reference to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital. There are over 15,000 people on waiting lists there too, and they've been waiting so long. The A&E Minister, you said you were there last week, the A&E, there's people actually getting up and going home to take their own chance at home because they've been waiting up to 14 hours. It's crazy, Minister. It has to stop.
Deputy Brian Stanley.
Thanks, Cahill, and I welcome the opportunity to address this. The constituency that I represent, LAOIS-OFFALY, has witnessed our healthcare system struggle consistently for years, and this is despite the exceptional work of the frontline staff in the services. There's now almost 30,000 people in LAOIS-OFFALY on hospital waiting lists. That's out of a population of 150,000. In Laois, 13,411 are on outpatients list, and 2,038 are on inpatient lists. In Offaly, 11,572 on outpatients list and 1,709 on inpatients. And behind every one of them, and it's been outlined here this evening, those figures, there's an individual who is suffering deteriorating health, delayed diagnosis, which obviously leads to other problems, stress and dreadful pain, people waiting for hip replacements, etc. And it's just unacceptable that they're fed year on year on painkillers, which wind up then developing ulcers and other health problems. And you've seen that in your constituency office, and I have, and we have to stop it. The hospital waiting list crisis, it can be sorted. I know it's a challenge. There's no job easy, and particularly turning around our health system, but it needs leadership and commitment. And this does mean facing down the vested interests. And you know better than I what they are, because you've had a closer look in the last year than I've been able to have. But in the 11 years that I've been a DD, and in the decades before that I was a councillor, I got some glimpse of what it's like. And those private vested interests need to be faced down. Hospital managers need to be running the hospitals. That's what happened in Kappa, if it's traced back to what went on. Not consultants, not private consultants. It needs to be the hospital manager running the hospitals. Our motion this evening sets out some of the solutions and our vision for resolving the crisis. We would introduce a single integrated hospital waiting list. That can be done. That's one of the can-do's. System which we believe would significantly speed up the process and reduce waiting times across the hospitals. We'll also provide a major capital fund to increase beds, staff and capacity within the system. This is the kind of ambition that we need to see from the government. What's particularly worrying, however, is that we're not seeing the progress that we need. For example, the Sláinte care, and this is really concerning. I pinned a lot of hope on Sláinte care, as did others in this House. Report notes that there is still no waiting list management and reduction plan in place, and this is despite the national waiting list in the state being at 907,648. There's an estimated 300 million which will go unspent, as I understand it, in the health budget this year, despite the COVID pandemic. Now, if it's not happening, that's good. If the money is there, it needs to be well used. And over 700 consultancy posts still lying vacant. I heard what you said earlier on, that's welcome, but there are still over 700 vacant. And we need, I don't see the urgency there to address this in government. So we need to be training and promoting those doctors into those essential vacancies. And just to conclude, and we should also have public-only contracts for consultants to work in the public system, unlike the current mess where they do private work during the working day in public hospitals. That needs to stop. New contracts for the new consultants coming in, and public only. Thank you.
Deputy Violet Ann Wynne.
So as someone who lives and represents a rural region and county, and as a mother of a child who has endured their unfair share of waiting lists, the findings of this survey, the survey brought forward by our spokesperson for health, David Cullinane, who's put Trojan work into the collection of this information. I can confirm what I have experienced myself, but also what I know the people of Clare are dealing with on a daily basis. You know, we have the curtailment, as it was called at the time, which resulted in the disappearance of the Shell and Dock services. We have dentists opting out of the medical card DTSS schemes. We have GPs not taking on new patients. So people are left without access to primary care. The people of Clare are definitely, absolutely feeling disadvantaged when it comes to access in healthcare, and that is for sure. If they have to or must present to Limerick Hospital, for example, it's one of the busiest emergency departments in the country, and they are more than likely going to spend a few nights on the trolley. Every week there is a constituent contacting my office asking for representation to the HSE because they feel they have been completely forgotten about. They don't understand how they could possibly be expected to wait and sit through chronic pain and anxiety caused by having an untreated illness. I'm working with one woman who has been trying to access rheumatology care for the last 9 years and coping with severe daily pain. And in the meantime, I have another constituent whose surgery, which was deemed urgent at the time of the consultation back in 2019, and his surgery has since been cancelled 3 times, but only once that we can see because of COVID-19 restrictions. And he was told he was on top of the list 9 months ago and is still waiting. In terms of children with additional needs, the average waiting time, as we know, is 19 months, and that's in spite of the 3-month legally imposed timeline. Sadly, once a child accesses an assessment of needs, they're basically back to square one, left out to dry and made source, resource and security intervention needed to support their development as if the AON hasn't happened. This is truly ineffective, and if I'm frank, it's immoral and needs to be addressed by this government. Major healthcare reform is absolutely needed, with key sláinte care personnel dropping and nobody seems to know why. It's not exactly a vote of confidence in this government.
I listened to your speech, Minister Donnelly, earlier on, and I think the biggest challenge you actually face is that no one believes you. I don't think, I'm not talking about people on these benches, but I think people that are on the waiting list don't believe you, and we have a broken health system, and I think that's a big problem. We heard the numbers earlier on. 900,000 of our citizens are on waiting lists. That's a staggering statistic. 1 in 5 people are on a waiting list for some form of health care. There are 36,000 people on the outpatient waiting list of Tallaght Hospital. That's just one hospital alone. 12,000 have been waiting more than 18 months. I don't think that's acceptable. Fine Gael have been in power for 10 years. They've made zero progress in improving the waiting lists. And Ministers, there's no real sign that I can see that anything has changed. Waiting lists are up 15% since the beginning of the pandemic, and we heard the reasons you outlined tonight. But they've also almost doubled since 2014. It's unacceptable that sick people who require urgent care are left in limbo for years waiting to see a hospital consultant. Of course, if you have money, you can skip the queue, and that's not right. Without urgently hiring key staff to fill posts, problems are only going to get worse. The health service needs major investment to boost capacity if it's to take up the waiting list. The government must use Budget 2022 to drive money into targeted areas of the health service to seriously tackle waiting lists and overcrowding. We'll hear that the biggest budget ever for health, but that's irrelevant unless it's targeted and spent wisely. And we're playing catch-up as our population is growing every year. We need to spend more every year just to stand still, and that's why we need targeted investment in key areas, as outlined in our motion. We need delivery of a major increase in beds, staff and diagnostic capacity to meet current needs and tackle waiting lists. We must introduce a centralised referral system and an integrated waiting list management system. Minister, we need a 21st century health system. We cannot leave sick people on waiting lists for months and years, and when they need vital treatment. We cannot consign them to a life of pain and suffering when that means the opportunity to break our health service. So, Minister, you have a big job ahead of you, but that's the reality.
Thanks, Les Corla. So I want to just focus my short time in relation to children as the children's spokesperson. And we know that there are 106,000 children waiting for an assessment, treatment or a diagnostic scan in a public hospital. The largest waiting lists are in ear, nose and throat and general paediatrics. I do want to acknowledge the work, though, that Minister Abbott has done in relation to the assessments, and I do know that that is an area that she has been working on. But I will say that a lot of the difficulty is, as you acknowledge yourself, the therapies. So, like, just one example we have in my constituency where somebody is waiting 3 years for speech and language. Now, you know, we all know about early intervention and it being key. 3 years is, you know, it's hard to even know what to say to a parent in that situation. So it's really, really important that the occupational therapy and the speech and language and all the other therapies that are needed are followed through on. And I do think that I would welcome if that's what you're going to focus on now, because it is really, really important. Developmental checks as well are absolutely crucial for young children, and a lot of these appointments have been pushed out, particularly due to COVID and then the cyber attack. And, you know, it does feel like for people that there is always something, you know, and I think that that's important that we reflect that message tonight, because people are really, really frustrated. Doctors and consultants will say that routine procedures are being pushed further and further out, and that many children are actually not being seen until they're adults, which, you know, is a whole other issue. I want to really briefly, in the 30 seconds I have left, mention a particular issue to Minister Butler, and I would take the opportunity to email this on to her. It is in relation to a nursing home in Ballyraggett, where in Kilkenny, where a patient has been approved for home care. They cannot find a carer, and they're in a nursing home since February of this year because of that situation. So I might send that on to yourself, because that's an example of somebody that can be moved on. The family want them home, they've been approved for the package, all they need is the actual person, and that obviously is going to lead to waiting lists. So I'm going to finish on that. It's obviously just as well just to commend my colleague, Deputy Cullinane, for the work on this. Thanks, Lachlan Corla.
Minister, I was going to respond by going through your own opening speech and unpicking a lot of what you said, but I'm not going to do so. I want to say a number of other things instead. And a lot of people have spoken tonight, both from government and opposition, who obviously care about our health services. And I can tell you that I care very deeply about healthcare, and I've taken an interest in this right throughout my own political career. For the 20 years I've been involved in politics, I've taken an interest because of what I've seen in my own constituency. And Deputy Butler, who shares a constituency with me, and the Cathaoirleach, who's in the chair as well, we've battled for radiotherapy services, we've battled for a mortuary, we battled for cardiac services. People have taken to the streets time and again to demand better healthcare. And they've heard all sorts of promises that in some cases were delivered over many years and in other cases not delivered at all. But I also care because of the experience of my own mum, and I've told you this story before. She got sick a number of years ago, and she was sick for about 3 or 4 months, and she had stomach pains. And it got so bad over Christmas one year that my family brought her to hospital, the University Hospital, Waterford. And she was treated very well. She was brought into A&E. They did a preliminary inspection, and they told her she would need a scan, but she would have to wait possibly 6 months for that scan. A staff member pulled the family aside and said, "I don't like what we've seen and the symptoms. You should take her to the private clinic, get the diagnosis," which we did, and we paid for it. Other families would not be in a position to do that, and she was diagnosed with cancer. And within 3 weeks, she had the diagnosis, and then she was seen in St. James's and got very, very good treatment, and unfortunately passed away in the palliative care centre in Harold's Cross, which gave her such tremendous treatment. And I vowed then that I would do everything I can to end the two-tier system. And that's why it's so important, Minister, that we bring about these big reforms in healthcare, because it's about people's experience. It is absolutely unacceptable that we have a two-tier system where if you have money and you have wealth, that you can get quicker and faster healthcare, and people who don't are waiting longer for treatment. You talked about Sarah earlier on, and I'm sure that was heartfelt as well, and you were able to solve a problem. but there are hundreds of thousands of Sarahs right across the public healthcare system that we need to provide for. It might come as no surprise to you that I want to be sitting where you are, and at some point I want you to be sitting where I am. I want to be a future Minister for Health. And in doing so, I believe that we have to not stand up to vested interests, but to work with people to bring about the big changes which are necessary. But we're going to have to face hard choices. For example, if we want to remove private healthcare from the public system to achieve equality, then we are going to have to do it. Not talk about it, but do it. If we want to realise universal GP care, then we're going to have to do it, not talk about it. And that's what I meant earlier about the snail's pace of progress on some of the big reforms. And you see, if the government comes under pressure in some of those big challenges, I'll be standing with those who want to bring about those big reforms, who want to deliver a single-tier Irish National Health Service. I'll be standing firmly there because I want those changes to be made. I've heard many politicians from across many parties talk about health as the poison chalice. We hear it all of the time in the media, talking about health as the one portfolio, if you're a minister, you don't want to get. And I think it's the one that you should seek first, because of the changes that you can bring about and the impact that will have on people's lives. Because for every one of those 900,000 people who are on a waiting list, and for all of those children who are on waiting lists, and for all of those who are waiting for assessments or trying to get into a hospital or get treatment, who are waiting too long, it's a disaster that we need to fix. And it isn't, Minister, the volume of people. It's the length of time that they're waiting is also the challenge. I accept that you are going to put a plan in place. And, you know, I have a limited number of staff. I produce an alternative health budget this year, which I believe is credible, realistic, deliverable. I will be launching it on Thursday, and I will, as always, send it to you. So there are solutions, and I'm prepared to work with anybody, including the government, to make that happen. So I hope that what comes from this debate tonight is that once and for all, a serious plan is put in place to tackle the waiting list crisis and to make the health service work for everyone.
Thank you, Deputy. Now that concludes the debate on this topic. Agus sí an ceist níos ná tá lasú I gceist, agus sí an ceist ná go néan tófar an lasú. The question is that the amendment be made. Na teachtaí, that's the amendment in the name of the Minister. Na teachtaí atá híomh na ceista abrigí tá. Na teachtaí tá na gwine abrigí níl.
Neil.
Stocha gwil an ceist riche, in my opinion. The question is carried.
Vote out.
Okay. The division has been called and it will be deferred until the weekly division time tomorrow evening. Got a meal